Everyone, hello, welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakyan, and today I'm sitting down with David Ewing Duncan. Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm pumped to host you. This is going to be a blast.
Awesome, I love the spot, by the way.
Boom.
Great view of the bay.
Yeah, good view of the bay. We got our epic director, Ron Vargas, in the back. Shout out to him, he's crushing it. We are also in BioTrillion's health tech company right now. They're an emerging one out of San Francisco, and we are very grateful for their location and sponsorship. Their link is in the bio as well. Simulation. We're pairing together global leaders with humanity's most thought-provoking questions. So We're going to be talking about it all. David is an author, he's a journalist, he's an entrepreneur. I love talking to him. This is going to be epic. So let's just jump right into it. This is a live stream, so feel free to comment and share. We'll see what you guys are talking about on it. Okay, I love asking this question to start it all off.
Wait a minute, I just want to know, we're simulated, right?
We are simulated.
Okay, so this isn't really us, it's simulation. Okay, got it, okay.
Yes. Okay, we'll get into that more.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, how do we maximize human potential?
Okay, it's a wildly broad question, but I guess that's obviously something that I've been fascinated with as a writer, and I think fascinated with from a lot of different points of view. I mean, out here in the Bay Area where we are, I think a lot of people think of it as technology, but I think of it also, politically, from a policy standpoint, from how we are as humans, and we right now need this rather desperately. How do we maximize what's best about humans? I mean, there's some things that aren't so great about humans too.
Yes.
But so I think of it more in a much broader sense. And I'm a historian by training, and it's been interesting to watch the sweeps of history. It tends to kind of go up and down on how well we're doing. And we've been on a little bit of a run here the last few decades, arguably. And trying to improve things around the world. There's still a lot of problems, but we're in one of those interesting moments now where are we going to go?
Yep.
So I think that technology, I'm not sure what you were expecting here, but technology is only part of the equation.
What else? What are the other components?
Well, like I said, policy. I think we are in a desperate state now politically. That the systems that we have and have been very successful, especially since, say, World War II, they were invented back in the 18th century. They've been updated a couple of times. I've written about this here and there. Probably last in the 60s. Starting with Kennedy or even before that, post-war period, we kind of upgraded it to allow government to help, say, develop a lot of the technologies that we're now using. I mean, early on, people don't like to admit this sometimes or even remember it, but the internet, space with NASA, any number of things came out of a collaboration between what you might refer to as society and the government, as represented in the government, and the private sector, and really smart people. And I think we need to, I think it's actually as important to figure out how to update that for the 21st century as it is all the other technologies that we're working on.
So collaboration is a huge component between. Is that also applicable to between nations as well, or should we maybe amass some of the smartest people across the world to work on something like AI and on something like healthcare and transportation, etc., or should it be? How much nationalism should there be within capitalism? What do you think there?
I don't know. I am both a pragmatist and a would-be optimist on all of that. I mean, the optimist in me, or I guess the kind of hope-for future in me, thinks that we probably are heading towards, or should be heading towards, a more global approach to this. But you have to recognize, I mean, that's been tried, and there's been a lot of utopian thinking about that. But the reality is that people do still start with their family and tribe. And the question is whether that tribe can be expanded, it can be a positive kind of interaction with other tribes or not.
Yeah.
And so I think you're naive if you're thinking that that a globalization will solve everything and then nationalism will go away. I think we're actually seeing now that we thought maybe globalism was taking over, but in fact nationalism is still really. So I think it has to be recognized and has to be thought about and dealt with creatively. But clearly there is this kind of global phenomenon. I mean, we think of it the global elite, but and that definitely exists. But
okay, that's actually one of our questions.
Yeah.
So maybe we should just quickly address that along the way. Is you said there clearly exists a global elite. That's one of our questions. Is there a global ruling elite?
But I think they're in Davos right now.
They're in Davos.
Yeah, right. As we speak. And
at the World Economic Forum.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. And but now, for example, the Rothschild family is not there, right?
Oh yeah, not everybody goes to Davos.
Okay.
And there are different elements of this global elite, and essentially it's a bunch of rich people. It's not always the case. I mean, Davos has a reputation. I mean, a lot of rich people go there, but it's also innovators and kind of a lot of interesting people. But it's not all of them by any means. I mean, you and I aren't there.
You're way cooler.
I don't know. I mean, I'm apparently going next year, but that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, you should be there.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff that happens there. There are other meetings like that, but there's definitely a global elite. As a historian, I can tell you there's always been a global elite, whether you're an ancient Mayan or Roman or whatever ancient Chinese
time period you were in.
Right,
yeah.
and the way most societies work is there is a sort of elite used to not be such a bad word. I mean, now you think of it more of like the 1% or the 0.01%, making all the money where the rest of us don't. But elite historically means that there's a group that kind of runs things. And in ancient societies, which are mostly illiterate and mostly they were workers, and then there was a small group at the top. Like you think of medieval Europe, there was the aristocrats and the king, and then everybody else. And that's always existed. And one might argue that the people that run our civilization, it's a much larger, broad, I mean, it's millions and millions of people, probably tens of millions of people, that if you took those people away, everything would stop working. But you'd have to take a lot of them away for it to stop working. Whereas like the Mayans, there's a theory that, they collapsed, actually 2 or 3 times, but they no longer exist, and most of their civilization is buried under jungle. It's because something happened to that elite that knew how to run things. And there are various theories about how that happened. It kind of happened in Rome. I mean, eventually the economics, the barbarian invasions and the economics kind of began to whittle away at this group that ran things. So anyway, that...
Can I say that it would be important then for the people that are in charge to explain some of the systems, how they work, to people that are also close to them? That way, in case something happens, that there's not just an oops, civilization can't function anymore moment.
Oh yeah, in fact, that's one of the reasons why it's so concerning right now that science and technology are under assault, and the truth, really. I mean, this whole fake news thing, which seems to me news that's inconvenient to certain people. Usually the truth that's inconvenient. But that's the most important thing. I mean, it is education and making sure there's a group of people that know how things run. But you also have to have a fundamental respect for facts and truth and science.
Exactly. Yeah.
And even if it's uncomfortable for you politically. And so, again, all of these issues that you discuss in these wonderful live casts here, I kind of come back at them in a little bit of a political or societal view, because that's where my background is in history, and I covered politics as a journalist. So that's global elite, though. We're in a funny period, but it's almost surreal, actually, because on the one hand, I think there is this global culture. Let's not call them elites, because it actually is a lot of people, and most people in most big cities, for instance, in the West anyway, and a lot of people even outside of the West are educated, or those who are educated. There's a certain system that they share, a certain set of facts. A lot of people even use certain set languages like English to communicate. A lot of people use Chinese, and there are other languages, Spanish. So there's sort of languages that people recognize and communicate in. And these are all requirements to have a sort of global sensibility. And there's a kind of shared culture that I don't know if you've read the book *Sapiens*.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
amazing book,
yeah, yes. And he describes this as being these fictions, basically, that we've all decided that we believe in.
Correct.
And when you stop believing in them, everything goes to shit.
Like how an intersection works. An intersection with traffic lights and vehicles and pedestrians, etc.
Yeah.
Stop believing in it. That turns to crap.
Yeah.
Same thing with money. It's a global hallucination that this piece of paper is worth a certain amount of money, and that gives you a certain good for
Well, pretty much everything we've agreed on. I mean, why do we drive on the right side of the road in certain countries, the left side of the road in others? I mean, really, we just kind of, I guess it's the law, but we've also just decided that that's what we want to do, and we think it's totally natural to do that.
To use toilet paper on our buttholes, all this kind of stuff.
Whatever. But by the way, that's not used in everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so that it's not a shared fiction necessarily, but I think that there are more people than ever in history alive right now, and as a percentage, there are more people that have bought into that system. Mm-hmm. But like I keep saying, it's under a lot of stress right now, because there are a lot of people left out, and this is where this division between the really uber elite, that really high level, that's making more money than that group has made in a century. You probably have to go back to the roaring 90s, 1890s, maybe the 20s, where you had such a gigantic divide between the very wealthy and even the next level of wealth. And so these are all issues, and we don't know really which way it's going to go.
And what's going to happen with it. So maybe we can, as we circle back to maximizing human potential, I want to add a little bit more to this global elite conversation. What's going on in Davos and the World Economic Forum is very interesting. When you tune in and you hear what they're talking about, you're very fascinated, because you almost have had no training in those fields. We're running around on a daily basis, not really trained into understanding geopolitics, geoeconomics. We're not talking about those things on a daily basis. So when you do get doses of them, you might want to immerse yourself more in them. So as you were just mentioning about how there might be it's already quite a big gap between people that earn lots and lots of money versus people that just earn money, like decent money. So my question then is, within this global ruling elite and the trajectory of civilization, do you think there might be a class-based speciation?
Well, I was about to get to that. In fact,
cool.
Yeah, I think as we're seeing, the phenomenon of Trump and some other sort of populist nationalists, those are always kind of fuzzy terms, but there are clearly a lot of people being left behind. And I would say even that upper middle class of people that are really running things, actually. I mean, that tiny little upper elite, they're making money off of things, and they kind of own things, and a lot of wealth goes to them. But the people actually running things feel under stress anyway, even though they're making a lot more money than most people. But there is the group that's more or less, feel like anyway they've been left behind. I mean, I think it's, what they're really feeling is, especially in the West, especially in the United States, the last 2 or 3 generations, really since the Great Depression and the war, World War II, each generation has felt improvement over their parents.
Yeah.
And what you're getting now is that's slowed down, and real wages for the United States has been pretty flat for decades, really. And people aren't feeling like they're improving, even though they're living far better than, say, their grandparents or their great-grandparents.
Yeah.
And this is beginning
That's
to happen
crazy.
even in other parts of the world, too.
Mostly first world?
Mostly first world. But you are getting some areas, there's what I used to always call the second and a half world, right? It's not the third world.
Yeah, second and a half.
And we don't even have communism very much anymore, which used to be the second, depending on how you view China, but which is the second world. But countries that clearly are not destitute and are doing reasonably well. You have a middle class in the context of that country, and they're feeling stressed too. And many of them, again, as we're seeing with Trump and all of that, are feeling not only a little left out, but actually kind of dispossessed or not being paid attention to.
Yeah.
And
that's not good.
You
need
good.
recognition in tribes and in civilization. Yeah.
And I hate to say this because I have a lot of friends who have a lot of money, but you almost have to wonder how much money does the top echelon really need?
Yeah. I actually have a really interesting thought that I have been talking about this class-based speciation with a couple people that have been studying it for a while, is that could it potentially be a decent idea to repress the amount of wealth that can be accumulated? And at first it's like, no, let capitalism go, that's horrible. But at the same time, here's my question to address that point, is that are we purchasing a fifth boat with our money, or are we hiring 50 people to solve a problem in the world with that money?
Yeah.
So that's sort of this school of thought, is what are you doing with the excess wealth? And no one's saying what you have to do. We're not forcing people, but we're just saying, can we have a conversation about like what could be better to do with the excess amounts? That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
No, I mean, again, if you go back in history, there have been most of history is actually like this. Like I said, you had the very wealthy and then everybody else, and but you have to look and see why have we been so successful in the last few decades in the West, and especially the United States. I mean, nobody's been as successful as we have.
China's now coming.
Yeah, the others are coming up, but one of the reasons is that the pie. Classic kind of economics of the last several decades. The pie kept getting bigger, and everybody had their slice. And in that sense, the wealthier got wealthier, but so did most other people. And what's happening now is the slice of the very wealthy has gotten. I mean, everything's still expanding. Donald Trump keeps talking about this amazing stock market, and it is amazing. Geez, was it 26,000 the Dow or something? Unprecedented.
Huge
gains,
but
it really makes that slice of that pie and I don't mean to harp on the very wealthy, but I will say that something that Henry Ford said, and Henry Ford, back when he started making his early automobiles, and before he became pretty much I would hesitate to use the word fascist, but he was pretty right-wing, as Hitler was rising and all that. But he did make a point that, in the early 20th century, when they started mass-producing automobiles, that he needed to pay his workers enough that they could actually afford one of his cars. So these are the kind of things that I think that global elite that's very wealthy sitting at Davos should really think about. Because what's the tragedy that's unfolding, and I think that's not too strong a word, is that the wealthy in the world have kind of disassociated themselves from the rest of the world, not realizing that their wealth, I mean, one aspect of it is their wealth actually comes from the rest of those people, and especially the newer wealth.
Paying them rent, buying their goods.
Right. Everybody talks about scaling. Well, how are you scaling? You're scaling by having millions and millions of people buying your products. And again, I don't know.
Let's just do a quick example. The people that made this building that we're sitting in right now, they made it with the intention that they were going to sell the individual units in the building and make money on that and make another beautiful skyscraper somewhere and keep doing this process. So it's the people that have bought the units within the building that have given them the excess wealth. So it's reliant on the people that are making the decisions with their money that they're earning to help them.
I think they're pretty wealthy people mostly in this building, but the point is well taken. I mean, if wages are flat or going down for most people who buy the goods that the wealthy depend on to create more wealth, that becomes pretty unsustainable. And I had a really interesting discussion with Tim O'Reilly of O'Reilly Media for the book I'm working on right now, and it actually was a kind of mind-blowing discussion, which we can talk more about, because I know you want to talk about the Matrix or whatever.
There's so many more topics, but this one's amazing where we're at right now. So
but one thing that Tim said was that there's such a thing as short-term greed or long-term greed, and he's a liberal. He comes from Sonoma County, and he's pretty well known for his politics, but he said, look, I'm a capitalist. I think capitalism, under certain circumstances, is a very viable system.
It's built the world that we live in today,
right.
pretty much.
But he said there's this short-term greed versus long-term greed. And he sort of meant like, okay, everybody's thinking quarterly like that, which is normally what you think about with short-term greed. But he's also talking about a mentality. He said since World War II, mostly the wealthy and the people that really make the civilization work have been thinking long-term greed. Like, how can I kind of create a society that will create wealth for me over time? And it's partly a community more of a community sensibility, but it's not trying to just grab for everything you can get, like
in short term.
right now. Yeah. And he's seen a slow shift over to the short-term greed. And
okay, let's give an example.
Yeah. Well, I think the banks continue to try to milk every dollar out of every instrument that they create, even those that, as we found out in the crash of 2008, 2009, were completely unsustainable. I mean, they knew that. These people are not stupid.
Correct. The short term.
Yeah.
What desire?
Yeah.
Move this.
There we go. Having these subprime loans, and where people who didn't have any money were able to buy houses and get mortgages one after another after another after another. I mean, pretty much anybody with a fifth grade education could have figured out that wasn't going to. But a lot of people made money in the short term.
Yeah. Okay, so what is this transition to long-term wealth accumulation? The people that are now in the top 1% or even 1% of 1%, that they are now starting to think about how they can work the systems of society to help them over a long period of time make more money. But does that also have something to do with them trying to better society at the same time? Like, you want to upgrade the technology that because of course their kids will interact with kids from other social classes, hopefully I guess, but maybe. And you want the rest of the world to not, it's actually in their best interest to not leave the rest of the world in a place of revolt or in a place of being upset. You'd think, yeah.
I mean, that's long-term greed thinking. And, that plays a huge role here too. I mean, almost everybody who is an adult, everybody was an adult in the 30s who remembers the rise of fascism, Nazism, and communism. Those were reactions to the Great Depression and to the excesses of the early 20th century. And one of the reasons that you have this somewhat boring, system like the UN and the EU and these different, unions and governmental systems put together after the war was to keep those kind of passions that caused essentially revolts. I mean, communism was a revolt, literally. I mean, if you take communism at its face, the political philosophy is to overthrow capitalism. And they did. I mean, and they controlled large parts of the world. It turned out to become authoritarian and totalitarian. It didn't come out exactly the way that the original, like Marx and Engels would have thought. But
which could be what a utopia somewhat looks like in a crazy way.
Well, it's funny. Anyway, we didn't get into that. It was mostly an analysis of capitalism, the short-term greed, if you want to look at it that way, of the late 19th century, and it was extrapolated into the early 20th century. But we've kind of forgotten that now. We've forgotten even like the rise of, white supremacists. I mean, all of that. And, we've forgotten what it was like during that horrible period when most of the world, the world was, we nearly destroyed ourselves.
And there's still 20,000 nukes on the planet, whatever the hell.
Yeah, well, that was even before. I mean, we only had the 2 nukes at the end of the war, but the World War itself was pretty bad even without nukes. And I don't mean to get too apocalyptic here, but we do have a pattern in history.
Could be what happened.
Things going really well for a while.
Yeah.
And we kind of forget what it was like.
Yeah.
When we were kind of screwing up and not doing things well.
Yeah.
And then we go into another period where
things aren't so great.
Well, things like what you're asking about.
Correct.
Like
Speciation.
There clearly are a lot of really angry people out there, and they're even willing to put up with Donald Trump, and and other leaders. Brexit in the UK. I mean, these to me are expressions of incredible frustration by people who feel ignored, like they're going backwards. And I do think that lest we forget with all the craziness of Donald Trump and all that, there is some truth to that. I mean, there is a group that is sort of bifurcated out over here, and that kind of has their own worldview and talks, in their own echo chamber. And the best of them don't. I mean, there are a lot of very wealthy people who are doing great good in the world too. And
Definitely.
it is kind of fun when you get like a Bill Gates, who was almost his Darth Vader character when in the 90s, when he was running Microsoft. Everybody, he was kind of a jerk, and then suddenly he has this transformation.
Boom, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
You can judge whether the money that they're spending in the Gates Foundation is, if it's being well spent and all of that. But clearly, the impetus is there for a bunch of smart people to try to do some good in the world, and that's not a bad thing.
And it's not a foundation just to say you have a foundation. It's not when you allocate.
Well, it kind of is, but that's okay. I don't care about it.
Well,
I mean,
if
he wanted to do it to counter the Darth Vader image, which a lot of people think that doesn't matter. I mean, if it's going for something that's positive,
it's a good idea of what we just described as taking your wealth and doing something with it that you find to be meaningful or impactful for the world, to leave behind a legacy of that. So do you think that it is inevitable that there is some sort of over this next hill, there's going to be some sort of a potentially bifurcation or trifurcation, however many roads the different socioeconomic statuses get sent down? Where do you see that sort of going?
I think that we're really at a crossroads, and it's unknown. I mean, that seems to be one trend that could be happening. On the other hand, I mean, you read like Steven Pinker's book on violence, and
it's such a good book.
Yeah, I mean, there's an amazing amount of evidence, and Barack Obama tried to talk about this. And I think he talked about it actually weirdly too much, and he didn't talk enough about the bad things that were happening to people. But clearly, the world as an aggregate is a much better off place than it was. And there's less violence, there's less war. I mean, these are just facts.
Less child mortality, less disease,
right.
More technology, longer lifespans.
Yeah, more literacy, things like that.
Yeah.
But that's not the full story. People. It's interesting. A long time ago, I wrote a piece for Atlantic it was called "Out of Africa," and it was basically how everyone, had worked so hard in Africa to, deal with the really horrific situation of infant mortality, things like infant mortality and illiteracy, and basic health. And I'd been a correspondent over there, and one of the things I at least observed for myself was that everybody was so frustrated because they couldn't really reach the next step, and all the money was kind of being pulled out in a funny way, at least for the old system of going in and building giant schools and factories and things like that. And the irony was that once people got one or two steps above being destitute and hungry and having to think about how they were going to eat, and all the horrors of living in a really, really subsistence environment, and you had minimal health and minimal food and minimal education, then what? Mm-hmm. And most of the countries, especially then, and some of them are a little better now,
meaning or fulfillment or self-actualization.
What are you going to do? What job are you going to have?
Yeah, correct.
And we've actually gotten even to another step, which is meaning in life.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And to be honest with you, I think this is why it's fertile ground for some of these movements, like extremist movements, wherever you want to go with that, on the right or ISIS or. There are an awful lot. I spent some time in the Middle East. There are an awful lot of young men there who are educated, or at least partially educated. They're not having to worry about basics in life, but they don't really. There's not really much for them there.
Yeah, correct.
And
there's not really an opportunity to go to a boot camp for software engineering.
I mean, we have enough trouble here with people that don't have fulfilling jobs, or jobs being taken away because of technology. But imagine a country where you've got 30 or 40% unemployment of people 25 and under.
Correct. Yeah, that's insane. That's insanity. What are you doing every day?
Yeah.
Jeez. And that's where all this crappy stuff on the streets comes from, mostly.
But I do want to say, I want to hastily add here, because I think, again, we have a lot of smart people that are thinking about this. And I mean, I just met a guy the other day who was a Palestinian doctor, and he was at the NCI. I believe he's an American, Palestinian American. But I was hearing about this new fund that the NIH, Bill Gates, and several others put together that was based in the Middle East and in Africa, I think in Nairobi. And they were trying to take some of the stuff I work on, like molecular, using genetics and molecular biology to try to, increase wellness and keep people from getting sick as much as possible.
Correct.
They want to take that to Africa and Asia. And you look at, right when you're about to kind of get a little bit despairing, you see initiatives like that.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we were just talking about. That's a mix of government and a rich guy.
Yeah.
And the private sector.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's exciting.
It is.
And they want to create a movement that will be far beyond even the $3 billion or so that they've raised.
Yeah.
So that's why,
amazing.
Yeah, but that's why we're at a crossroads. I mean, which way is it going to go? Who knows?
So you're right. There's been a lot of indication in the past that life has gotten so much better. And I'm just curious, are people having these conversations about the potential trajectory of civilization in a way that of socioeconomic split? I mean, Hollywood's done so much with these movies and stuff, but it just seems more and more real when you go to 6th Street in San Francisco, which has some issues near Market Street or in Tenderloin-ish, and then you come into one of these buildings and then you think to yourself like, whoa. I mean, of course, genetics and environment mold people into certain scenarios, and it's difficult to dig yourself out of things like that sometimes, but holy cow. And then there's a whole level above even this. And then there's, is there a level above that? And what are they talking about? How, what is initiatives like what you just described? Are they talking about things like that? That seems to be one of the most pressing things, in my opinion.
Well, I think there is a lot of discussion. I mean, despite the weird turn that our national politics has taken, in a funny way, even on that, I think that's a gigantic wake-up call. I mean, for instance, Democrats and liberals, after fighting these amazing battles during the 50s and 60s into the 70s, around race and women's rights and environmental rights and all of that, they sort of, they won certain things like the EPA and civil rights, Voting Rights Act, things like that, and then they sort of retreated to their coasts and the cities, and they left the rest of the country sort of ignored it. And I think that they won't be ignoring it in the near term here. And it may be that we needed a wake-up call, and I'm giving away kind of, I guess, my political leanings in a way, although I consider myself more of a pragmatist. And,
it is a big wake-up call, though.
Yeah, the things
it's a massive wake-up call.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And maybe we have to kind of survive this period here, which at least some people view it that way. Or even if you like what's going on,
it's a wake-up call for that as well. Interestingly enough, for even the people that like what's going on.
It's not impossible that in the midst of this, divisiveness and partisanship, that you will actually have a better, outcome emerge from this.
Correct.
I mean, we talked. Yeah, we talked earlier about politics and policy needing revamping. Part of what we need is to get smart people back in politics. It's been some.
Eric Weinstein talks about why don't we have any engineers in politics? Why don't we have? It's not like they're not capable. I mean, they can handle some of the most complex math and science. They build the systems that people use every day. Why can't they take positions inside of Congress?
Well, I've written several pieces on this. One of my favorites was called Thomas Jefferson Would Work for Google X. This was about 3 or 4 years ago, and I talked to Bill Maris, who used to head up Google Ventures, and he actually started out in government. I didn't know that at the NIH, and then he went into venture. I said, well, why aren't you in government? Why aren't you trying to? I mean, you're trying to solve certain problems through Google Ventures, and he said, because I don't feel like government's a place that I would get much traction. And I'd like to go back and talk to him now, because I think there's been a bit of a sea change among smart people who really have grown up in a generation, especially the last generation, that has seen, government kind of at its worst in many ways, and starting with Reagan, and I don't know, and there are different periods. I don't mean to blame one ideology or the other, one party or the other, because there's been a lot of government bashing, and probably rightly so. But the government is in a way us, and if it's sort of screwing up, then we're screwing up. And forget who's in power, or even what your ideology is. And I don't know. I mean, they talked about the best and the brightest in the 60s, and that's sometimes used in an ironic way now because they got us into Vietnam and all of that. But they also are responsible for a lot of what our world is today. On the positive side, like we said, the internet, NASA, the Apollo program, the highway system. I mean,
all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And
penicillin.
Wouldn't it be nice if we got some of the really smart people that also have a social conscience and a sense of community? And this is what people like Tim O'Reilly are working on with Code for America. And so again, those are really positive steps.
Yeah.
But one outcome here is,
and that is how to maximize human potential. Things like that's a good back to the first question. Understand all the things you listed kind of did just that. So what are those things of the 2010s and 20s that are going to do that?
Yeah, but out here in the Bay Area, the last probably 20, 30, 40 years has become so unidimensional focused on technology. And there's an enormous amount of wealth here. I mean, this is not, even though we do have a couple spots left like the Tenderloin, which is I think now about 3 blocks or 4 blocks. It's not, most of this city is really, it's a very, very wealthy city. But I think that all of the things that are happening in the world and this really important moment that we're in where it could go badly or well, it is getting people's attention. And again, I've been a huge person that's been saying, pay attention.
Correct, yeah.
But I think, democracy, as Winston Churchill said, it's the worst form of government except all the others. And I always love that. But part of what he meant...
What's next?
Yeah,
what's next?
Well, part of what he meant was that democracies really don't work very well unless there's a crisis. And then sometimes they collapse because of the crisis, but it also can make them stronger.
And I always wonder what's next in terms of what kind of political structure is next. So maybe we quickly address that is, do you think that democracy can be modernized in a way that makes for a better future? Created in the 18th century, it has managed to update itself several times. Yeah.
And, there's
so many more disruptions that are happening now than in the 18. I mean, we just got a car and some medicine and stuff like that, and now and airplanes and stuff. But now we have with the internet and with computing and rockets and
we haven't even really talked about this. I mean, the pace of this exponential pace, and I don't entirely like that word. A lot of people use it, but it's fast. It's fast. To me, it's not only fast; it's a lot of things happening at once. I mean, we've had technological change for the last 500 years, and we're still here. And even though we've had some ups and downs, but I do think that it works best when we, as society, figure out ways to allow technology, freedom to move forward. But we watch closely and we start. I hate to use the word regulation, but certainly in healthcare where I'm in, you want people to be making sure the drug you're taking isn't going to kill you. And there are some good reasons to have a certain amount of regulation.
Absolutely.
And I think you're about to see this happen like with social media, because clearly the people that built social media, we loved them for a long time. Now we're like, there's the dark media, there's the interference in the elections. There are these other manipulations and abuses of social media. And how are we, the people, the society, going to control that? I mean, I'm a person I haven't sworn off of social media, but I could. I mean, I kind of see the dark side.
The dark side.
There's still enough of, positive. I love being able to communicate with my friends and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, yes.
But, keep twisting. What you do? Just leaning over. But clearly something needs to happen. And this has happened again periodically, like in the roaring 90s and the 1890s. That part of that came from new technologies and energy sources like oil. And we broke up Standard Oil, which was almost as big as the government at one time. And that was at a pretty conservative time too. But we decided that if you want to look at like government regulations or rules as like monopoly rules, we decided that we need a new monopoly rule. Like after 3 rolls you go to jail, not 4. Maybe it was 4 before. And that's part of what this is. It's creating a set of rules that everybody has to follow, and that most people agree with, and that keep the society moving forward, not stagnating.
You brought up a good amount of these examples of letting technology kind of go forth, but then keeping a close eye. Society keeps a close eye on its progress, just in case. So we just had Adeo Resi on here on Friday last week, and we had discussed kind of the importance of maybe keeping these sorts of technology experiments, because Adeo had mentioned that society isn't quite as conscious as we'd like it to be. I mean, we're not really some 30-year-old adult that's very conscious and aware and everything. We're kind of like 13-year-olds with firecrackers and stuff like that. And so with something like, I love that analogy, it was so good. So with something like maybe genetic engineering, maybe we need to keep it in a more closed setting for now and test it for 5 years and see how that works, and then let it go. Because if we do this no regulations, China hands-off thing and let it go wherever it goes, then you might win in some cases, but society, this could be an existential threat at the same time.
Well, by the way, China isn't anything goes. China has a little bit different system, and they more and more are worried about this. And in some cases, like with AI, they may actually turn it towards, the state using that technology. So they may actually just be using it in a different way. So it's not anything goes. I don't think anybody thinks that you should be able to do anything with like gene editing.
There
may be a few people, but
that think that.
I mean,
and many capitalists also think that, which in a nutshell kind of is something to worry about, because again, that we're playing with what Google CEO said is more important than fire and electricity, and we're kind of just playing with it on open.
No. I mean, the reality of gene editing is whether you think anyone should be able to use it or not, is it can be used by many people. It's very simple. Or comparatively simple compared to earlier techniques. It's relatively cheap. I mean, high school students are winning awards using CRISPR-Cas9.
High school students are?
Oh yeah. The Intel Award 3 years ago. Now the kid was working with George Church, who's a major geneticist at Harvard, but he won one of the Intel Awards anyway.
That's amazing.
Science Awards as a high school student.
That's amazing.
But the point is this. We haven't had a lot of people making nuclear bombs, not because, actually making the bomb isn't that hard. It's getting the materials and handling them. So you did have a kind of check there on that really deadly technology. But CRISPR-Cas9 and other gene editing techniques are only going to get easier. And I think that we as a society, we're already thinking about it, and you do worry that there's some rogue lab somewhere that's going to do something.
Absolutely.
But this is where, again, I think there are different ways this could go, and I even have mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, it's really scary, just like nuclear materials getting in the hands of a terrorist or somebody is really scary. On the other hand, we have kind of muddled through. We haven't destroyed ourselves yet, despite a lot of apocalyptic movies. We'll see. Maybe somehow we continue to muddle through. One can only hope. I wouldn't bet on that, though. I mean, I would like to have not 13-year-olds playing with firecrackers, but maybe some of these smarter people we're talking about, and they are out there. They're really thoughtful, smart people,
But they're like
who are
15
thinking
years
about
old,
this.
let's say. Let's be real. They're really not, not that much more advanced because we still have so many of these sort of issues that we see.
Well, they're not all 15. I mean, one of the fascinating things about CRISPR-Cas9, which by the way is this technology that was, developed around 2012, and suddenly, we could easily edit genes, which is before you couldn't. And one of the co-discoverers of that, Jennifer Doudna, who's across the bay, right over there at Berkeley, she and others did something almost unprecedented among scientists, discoverers like her. I mean, she'll go down in history as one of the great discoverers.
Definitely.
With Watson and Crick and all of that, I would guess.
Yeah.
Certainly in that group.
Yeah.
She essentially said, "Whoa, wait a minute," a couple years after, or soon after her discovery, and said, "This is really scary technology."
Yeah.
In fact, she even, in the book that she wrote, talked about having this nightmare of being taken in to meet Adolf Hitler, who wanted to know about our technology.
Jesus.
I mean, that's crazy. I hang out with a lot of scientists. Usually don't think that way, but she and some other people who are well over the age of 15 decided to hold
but as a
meeting.
Metaphor. That was a
no,
metaphor.
I understand. I'm sort of meeting
if
a
you
metaphor.
think that they are, okay.
Yes.
It's more like 9 years old and like 12 years old, but because society's really
there's
not
the wisdom
that
of children too, but they held a meeting and actually declared a voluntary moratorium on this technology, which again, scientists don't. It's only really happened one other time in history, which had to do with an earlier form of genetic engineering called recombinant DNA in the 70s, and they briefly had a moratorium on that while they decided and there's a lot of discussion and talk going on again at that organizational level, and some of it is government, and actually the National Academy of Science has sponsored some of these meetings, so that's government money. But this is what I was talking about earlier. This is a community of the smartest people in those fields coming together and discussing not just the science or technology or how cool it is or starting a new company, but also the ethics and the morality and what this means for that long-term, call it long-term greed or whatever you want to call it, but how is this going to affect our children and our grandchildren?
Absolutely.
And that is so important that they're
important.
doing that.
Correct.
And that's partly because the government itself is kind of, I don't know where they are with this. I mean, Obama was really good at putting together commissions and had some really smart people working for him in the Office of Science and Policy, Science, Technology, and Policy, whatever it was. But the current administration has nobody in that office, by the way. But so as maybe our traditional political kind of structures are not up to the task necessarily, or having some difficulty adapting to this new world, you are having communities of smart people who actually understand this stuff.
Yes.
And at least in that case, now it's not happening on everything, and I worry a lot because there's an awful lot of other stuff I follow that's beyond CRISPR that nobody really even knows much about.
Yeah. Not yet. We're hoping to get so the notion of constantly keeping our children and their children in mind should at least make us more aware and conscious of what we're building and why it's important to keep that in mind as we go forward with technology and even the socioeconomic statuses. So that's good. There's so many different ways to maximize human potential, to talk about these things. That was a great chunk. Okay, let's talk about. Let's talk a little bit about, and you can feel free to be as you restrictive on the amount that you can share about this, but we have been talking a while about the beauty of taking the most interesting thing about humanity and being able to analyze it and make it applicable to our lives, which is our data that we leave behind. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of something that you're up to. And whereas we have something like genomics that is a very static thing, we have proteomics, which is a much more a thing that a dynamic thing, something
right.
that, yeah. And so now with analyzing things like that and being able to make my life better, your life better, other people's lives better, that's kind of some of the things that you're up to. Why is that so important? Where do you see that going with healthcare?
Well, I've been, by the way, genomics isn't entirely static, but it does change with epigenetics over time, but it's mostly static. And I'm working on a project, or actually it's the second phase of a project I started 18 years ago, which is hard to believe, called Experimental Man.
Yeah.
And I was actually sequenced in 2001 genetically for a Wired story. And I've been kind of test driving different technologies in healthcare and molecular biology that could be tried out by a healthy person. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a book in 2009 called Experimental Man, which went over all the state of the technology at the time. And it was genetics, proteomics, like you said, which are the proteins in your body, the metabolites in your body, mm-hmm. things like that. But mm-hmm. it was very early. And I didn't really find out all that much. But the last several months, I've been re-upping again, mm-hmm. Experimental mm-hmm. Man 2. Mm-hmm. And the technology has moved ahead very rapidly, especially in the last, say, 3 to 5 years. And you got the advent of AI, artificial intelligence, which a term I don't really like, but it's more along the lines of really advanced analytics and machine learning and deep learning, things like
Correct,
that.
yeah.
So you're actually able to begin to make sense of some of this data. So I have a massive amount of data that I'm trying to figure out and sift through from a number of companies, most of which are fairly new, which are offering new products. And unlike 2009, when the book came out almost 10 years ago, I actually think that we are within, say, 3 to 5 years of having products and systems for testing. Cost is one question, whether when it'll get cheap enough for the average person, but you probably will be able to find useful things about yourself.
Yes.
And especially for common diseases, which has been the problem.
Yes.
Rare diseases we've gotten much better at identifying.
And identifying the start of the formulation of this problem.
And this idea of radical wellness, which is the title of my current talk, that's what it's all about. Mm-hmm. How do we mm-hmm. take these new technologies, kind of radical technologies, if you will, being able to test not only for genomics, but all of these other omics, as they're called, including the microbiome, the bacteria in your gut. Yeah. But it's also behavioral data, it's diet, it's your environmental input, how much time do you spend in the sun, all of those things. And somehow make sense of that in a profile that you may be able to determine that magic moment where you go from a state of healthiness to a state of disease, long before you show symptoms, which is what the medical system waits for now until they really react, to a health situation, which in some cases is too late, or it's pretty late. Yeah.
Stupid.
Yeah.
It's funny that we developed to get to this point, and only now did we realize that. Oh wait, we waited until the last possible minute.
Well,
it seems crazy.
It's stupid now only because we have technologies that we can do better with. Before you didn't. I mean, there wasn't.
But even
much
then,
you
there
could
was
do.
no. But there was no light bulb to be like, how do we go in and figure out when it starts, rather than when I have all these symptoms. So that seems to be available to more wealthy people to start, and then hopefully less wealthy people as time comes along. This is partly one of the things that will increase our lifespan.
Right.
So if you don't die from something that, if we are able to target that thing that's causing you to die right when it's starting, we can make the tweaks that prevent it from starting, and then you can live more, you can live longer. So a lot of people have conversation about, okay, well, if we're living longer, what are we doing in our time? How are we able to provide more to the economy during that time, or to other people? How can we give more? All that kind of stuff. And then furthermore, will the population be increasing as well along the way of our planet? Yeah.
Well, I wrote a short book about that, a TED book and a TEDx talk I gave called When I'm 164.
Yep.
And the subtitle of that was The Science of Radical Life Extension, which includes some of these things we're talking about. and what happens if it succeeds. And my real interest in that project was, beyond the science, which is fascinating, and that was genetics and stem cells and bionics and everything else. But there's also what happens if we succeed, and that's partly what you're asking, and that's almost another issue. I mean, right now we're still dealing with horrible diseases that that people die from, especially when young people are struck down by cancer, things like that. I mean, clearly nobody wants that.
Correct.
And the more that we can develop technologies that can prevent that, catch cancer early enough that it can, hopefully be dealt with, or even with diabetes, which is a chronic disease for millions and millions of people around the world. What if you could catch that early on and change it? But I think society does have this interesting question on what are we actually ultimately doing this for? I mean, we want to end suffering, and especially our own suffering, people we know, anybody you come in contact with.
You wish them the best. You want to end their suffering. Yes.
But as a species, that book just and we did. I had a little program at Berkeley at the time. We did some surveys on how long people wanted to live and why, and it was really fascinating because nobody wants to be sick. Nobody wants anybody to suffer from illness. But on the other hand, most people we surveyed didn't want to live much past the current lifespan.
And Aubrey de Grey talks about it very interestingly because he basically says that you just want the choice. Is the thing. You just want the choice. You don't want to have to die at 80. You want the choice to be able to live until 160. So that way, for me, I just want to observe where society goes. I want to be a part of the growth of civilization and society in a beneficial way. So that's always really interesting thing about what are we going to do in that second period of like something like 80 years? Like what would we do? How many more times would we skydive or start a business? Or when would we even start a family? Would we even have kids? Would we... What would we be doing, and then how would it affect the population of the Earth as well?
Right, and you have to think about this too. Like, if people lived to be 164, Albert Einstein might still be alive. Steve Jobs would almost certainly be alive. I mean, a lot of people that we admire. On the other hand, Joseph Stalin might still be alive. And some of the old dudes running things now would be around for another 100 years. And so, I mean, you got to kind of think about this. And they would certainly choose to want to be around.
Definitely.
And, they would get to have that choice if that, if that technology existed. So, this is a lot of what I do, by the way. And, Aubrey hates it when I bring that up, by the way, Aubrey de Grey. I think we just need to think about this stuff. What does it really mean? And you can't just rush into a new technology and just assume that because it's so cool and it's at least initially seems so amazing and helpful that there aren't downsides. Almost all technology has a good and a bad. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out the bad. Like social media. I think we're going through this really weird. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg was on the cover of Vanity Fair a year ago, in the January issue of Vanity Fair, where they were talking about he might be running for president. And I think that was the peak of him being, the golden boy of social media and technology. Since then, Facebook has had kind of a rough ride this year. What happened in the election and the dark media and all of this. So that's just to say that we just have to be aware of this stuff, and that goes with what we're doing in healthcare too. And we talked earlier in the conversation about this huge irony of certain parts of the world where you brought healthcare with all good intentions. I mean, it was horrible watching people die of stupid things, like infectious diseases that we got rid of in the West a long time ago. But then you had this irony of, okay, then what? And so I think these things are solvable, and I think they're actually pretty exciting to think about. And I don't know, maybe it's something that humans will do a lot better than machines, and we should be training people to start solving those problems as AI takes over in certain traditional industries. So in some ways I get kind of excited. I'm worried on the one hand, but I also get excited that if we're aware of these things, this is why that's the part as a writer and I guess a thinker, I like to focus on, what are the implications of technology? Yeah. And it's because if we're not aware of them, we'll be caught off guard.
Exactly.
And
if
we
we're not
are aware of them,
analyzing,
we can think of all kinds of new and crazy and wonderful things that we can do with them.
It's so important to keep an eye on technology as it evolves and always be conversing about what's good, what's not looking so good, why, where we should be going with it. That's all really important. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this. The cosmos are so vast, and they're so vast, and there's so many other habitable planets orbiting other stars out there, 1 in every 5, we think. Are we alone in the cosmos?
I almost said yes to preempt you, but I thought you were going to ask, is there life in it? Who knows? Who really knows? I mean, there is a school of thought that the peculiar circumstances that created what we call intelligent life, or which is us, that's what we think of as intelligent life, on Earth, a creature just like us, we could be unique, who knows? We don't even really know what forms could intelligence take?
Correct, so many.
You could have intelligence all around us and we don't even know it. Correct. Because our perception, our senses are so limited.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I hope so.
I hope so too.
Kind of,
what a waste of space that
on
would
the other
be.
hand, as a historian, I can tell you that when advanced civilizations meet those that are not advanced.
Correct.
I wrote a book on the Conquista a long time ago on Hernando de Soto and Pizarro and Cortez. They did not treat the lesser, or at least in their view, lesser advanced civilization very well.
We kind of don't right now either.
Yeah,
with
right.
What we were talking about within us. Yeah.
So we got to, watch out what we. What we hope for here, a civilization advanced enough to find us here and get to us, would be a lot more advanced than us.
Or observe us even. Just observing is fun to think of we're being observed.
Although maybe they're more advanced on the things that are important, like morality and ethics. Or
exactly.
I don't know. I mean,
they're already on other planets or on other star systems, which is a major advancement. We're trying to get to our first other planet.
Something that's actually much more interesting to me than is there life on other planets is what are we not perceiving? And
what are we not perceiving here?
Yeah, what is happening in the universe and even I don't know around us in this room that we can't perceve
because of our senses are limited.
Yeah, our senses are so limited.
And how do we augment humans to see those things?
Yeah, and I'm writing this new book on robots, and it's different scenarios for different kinds of robots, and a lot of people I'm talking to would like some kind of robot or system that allowed them to greatly enhance their senses. And, we don't even know what that would mean.
Yeah.
And, we can only see, for instance, our eyesight, we can only see the visible spectrum is tiny. Yeah. You get thermal and infrared and on out into the whole spectrum. Yeah. And we have machines that can see some of that.
Yep.
But, what are we missing?
Yeah. Yeah. What would life be like with all of these augmented senses? I like that. How can we build that into ourselves? And then also could potentially life have evolved in other places where those things were maybe built into it or maybe they augmented themselves? Maybe it is likely that humans must do something like teleport or travel at the speed of light or something in order to unlock other civilizations talking to us. Yeah, something like that. The zoo hypothesis.
Well, really people feel like Buckaroo Banzai. I don't know if you ever saw that silly movie. Is it Peter Weir? I don't know, but it was. They made this machine that could go into a different dimension, and there were all these creatures and weird things, and and then they came back to our dimension, but brought one of the creatures with. Yeah. How do we know what we don't know? It's correct. But to me, I hope they're civilizations on other planets. I hope we meet them. I would love to have a Star Trek universe where we have warp speed and can visit all these places. But I think in some ways it's far more interesting to figure out how we could understand what we can't even perceive right
around
now.
us. Yeah, right in front of our faces.
Yeah, and in my robot book, one of the people I talked to is Brian Greene, the physicist. And I'm asking people what kind of robots that they want to meet. And he wants to meet a robot that actually would understand how the universe was made, how it began, and how it will end.
Yeah, that's cool.
Because that's where he lives.
Yeah.
You know, those physicists, they sit there with their mathematics and their equations trying to understand big questions like that. But he would just like to know. And that would, of course, mean having some kind of system or machine that could actually perceive all of it, all of this stuff that is so beyond our perception right now.
So another good one is just perceive within, because we don't tune in enough either. We're always just taking outside in. And so by tuning in, you can do things like you can feel your actual heartbeat, which, you know, beating 100,000 times a day keeps you alive.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. And then other things like you can feel so much more of the environment around you when you're not speaking, and when your eyes are closed, and when you're just breathing and focusing on your breath. You can hear more.
Well, there's meditation. I mean,
exactly.
You know, people can. Yeah, I mean, we already have hints of this.
We have hints. It's so interesting, all the different ways.
I mean, you know, another writing project I'm doing right now, the main character has been outfitted with advanced prosthetics that are wired directly into her brain, and all kinds of funky things start happening. You know, she can begin to perceive, you know, some animals can perceive electromagnetic waves, like fish swim in unison because they're sending out, you know, basically electrical waves that are read by the next, you know, they stay in sync like that. We have a little bit of perception, like you can kind of sense when someone walks in a room if you're facing the other direction. But what if that was greatly enhanced and you could actually feel, you know, all the electric fields that are happening around you? I mean, just for instance. So, you know, that's the kind of stuff that if I really want to go way out and,
that's
you know,
cool.
In
I can
almost
feel
sci-fi
your
land.
heart beating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I feel your heart, or I feel, yeah, I can almost sense you by the electrical field around you, or something like that.
And I wonder how far that goes. Like, you know, Ron right now is maybe, you know, 12 feet or something from us.
Yeah.
You know, would we feel him? Probably, right? Probably, but it's very interesting. Okay, so and piggybacking on the cosmic question is the simulation question. Again, it's, are we in a computer simulation? And again, it's not something we can touch, right? It's not something we can feel, which makes it difficult to address. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, again, this conversation I had for my book with Tim O'Reilly was fascinating, and I brought him up a couple times. But he thinks we're living in the Matrix, and some others do too around here that I talk to. He doesn't mean the Matrix from the movie, you know, that's a virtual reality universe, or, you know, we're like sitting actually in pods, you know, as batteries, you know, like in the movie. What he means by that is that we are humans living inside the machine right now. And, you know, when you order something on Amazon, you are the human that's making that decision, but it goes out and there's a whole mix of machines and humans that are going to deal with that, and then it shows up at your door. And more that's becoming the machine deals with what we've asked for.
Correct.
And, you know, if you think about it, Google, Facebook, I mean, kind of these really important entities that I don't know how many times you Google things a day.
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah.
And we are living in that world already, and that's not a thing. You know, it's not a tangible thing like this, you know, this window here.
Yeah.
It's something, but it's as important to us as anything that's tangible.
Yeah.
And so we may already, in that sense, be living in a form of the Matrix. Or
it's like a step into it is with our consciousness interacting with this digital world.
Right. And, you know, I'm sure there'll be another stab at Google Glass, which, by the way, was the geekiest looking thing, and it was almost embarrassing to put it on. Why would I don't know. It was just a design problem, really. You know, but you know, VR sets, and I think we're going to more and more be incorporating that into, like, say, Google search. Or, you know, you're ordering something on Amazon, you put on your Oculus, and, you know, your things are coming at you in the air or whatever. I've seen some advanced VR that you basically see the world you're in, but there might be something like a person sitting there who's in China.
Yeah.
And it looks like they're right there,
Right
but
there,
everything
yeah.
else is the same.
And you're collaborating with them or interacting
Yeah.
with them, or right there.
And there may come a point in the future when you kind of wonder what's real, and you have to take off the Oculus to see what's real and what's not.
Yeah. So that line's getting blurred too with virtual.
I think it will. We're not there. It's still really early days.
Correct.
But
yeah.
I think more and more we're going to figure out ways. I don't know. It may stay as our phones. I mean, this is a form of the Matrix, if you will. I mean, I am really connected with this thing.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. Exactly. Likewise.
What would we do? We can't even remember what it was like before we had these things.
No. Yep.
I mean, God, did you have to call up a restaurant to make a reservation?
Yeah.
Or, how did you even find out about the restaurant? I don't know. You went into a magazine or a newspaper? Or?
You had to rely on the other person arriving at the location at 6 p.m. when you
let's meet someplace at 8. And if they got held up or you got held up, nothing to do.
And the Turing test is also a really interesting one. I think we're bridging that gap or in that line as well, where I can't tell if you're real or not, if a robot AI is real or not, and a human. So,
but there's some humans, I think, that might fail the Turing test.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
I'm not really. I've always kind of wondered what that really was. I mean, there is an official sort of Turing test, but I don't know. I mean, there's Alexa. I don't know.
How much human is that?
Is it parts of Alexa that now would... I mean, I still find all of that somewhat clunky, right? Yeah. But, there will be a time, I think it's going to come fairly soon, say in the next 10 or 20 years, when it's going to be like, the computer on the Starship Enterprise. You walk into your room and you go, Earl Grey, hot, and turn up the lights. And I mean, really, you can already do that.
Exactly, with your thinking, or it'll just know because again, you're.
Well, if Alexa's wired into your, house.
Exactly.
Most of that stuff.
And I was just recently on Minefield with Michael Stevens was learning about how you just wear an EEG and you just think that you're going to press a button. And even before you're trying to get to the button but the button lights up red, and you got to try and press the button before it lights up red. But you're being red, and it turns red before you're being red. The button turns red. It's ridiculous. So, how much free will do we actually have? What is your stance on that? Let's see.
Well, I don't want to give one more example, which I think is kind of fun. I was at a party a couple of weeks ago. And a friend of mine who works for Veritas, Rodrigo Martinez.
We were at that party together.
Yeah, you were there. Did you see that?
Okay,
so
awesome.
He got an Alexa or one of Echo Home or something, and he asked for it to give him his genomic results because Veritas is a genomic testing company, and it did.
Cool. Yeah.
Alexa, what was my result for whatever? And
that was crazy.
I mean, that just. That suggests all kinds of interesting issues.
Yes.
Like, should Alexa really even have that private medical knowledge like that? But anyway, sorry, what was your question?
And then it'll just tell you over voice when something is occurring inside of your body that you should attend to.
Right.
And be aware of. That's so good.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Good plug there. So the question was about free will. How much free will do you think we actually have, if any?
I don't know. I mean, there are certainly... there's research that suggested that our brains kind of make decisions before we're entirely aware of them. That's controversial. There's some question as to whether that really is true or how you
we were just talking about that with the button pressing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
My view of stuff like that is, so what? I mean, how my brain actually makes.
Yeah.
I guess. I'd like to think I'm in control, but if my brain is more in control than me, that's me too, I guess, in some ways. Although, I guess it bothers some people that that's physiological, and it could be no different than the instinct of some other animal. That's just how we evolved, and it's a total illusion that we have free will. But we're a product of our genetics, our upbringing, that nature nurture thing.
Correct.
There's a lot of evidence that. Trauma, even in a recent generation, like a grandparent or great-grandparent, might influence us.
Yeah.
That's not us.
Correct.
That's, I mean...
It's crazy.
I think, we do know that we can modify behavior, however. So, you can, sometimes it's very difficult.
Neuroplasticity through life.
Right. I mean, addiction, for instance, can be treated. People can stop being addicts.
Yes.
different behaviors, positive or negative.
It's amazing stuff.
Yeah, it can be influenced, and that's you kind of, in many ways, willing yourself to behave a certain way.
Correct.
And I think for now, we go with that we are making those things. I mean, we are deciding to do those things.
Yeah, we are deciding.
It certainly seems like it.
Seems like it.
And this may be part of that ultimate question of what we're not perceiving or what we don't really know that's out there. And some of that we may not want to know. Or we may be sorry we found out.
Yeah, correct.
But who knows?
So what is your stance on the future of blockchain technology?
I just recently got annoyed. Well, I got annoyed because I could have bought some early days. And I don't know.
Well,
I
we're
was very
talking about
skeptical
one
it.
of the applications
Well,
right now,
like Bitcoin,
which is
yeah.
cryptocurrency, one of the applications.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the blockchain is a much. As far as I think I still get it, I think it's one of those fictions we talked about earlier. I think people decide, okay, this is the way we're gonna, this is the way we're going to handle medical information, for instance.
Yep.
And it'll be encrypted and et cetera. I think it's
an immutable ledger of you.
Right. I mean, I think we need to. My understanding of the ledger system is it's still clunky, and we probably need
lots of energy.
More of those monopoly rules around it to make it more accessible. I mean, people trying. I have friends that are trying to sell their bitcoins, and it's really hard to do. Actually, as it turns out, because you have to get on this ledger and all of that, and that's still early days. But I don't know. To me, it's just another system. I do worry about the people who lost their encryption code when they bought Bitcoin back when it was $10 or something, and they stuck it somewhere. It's like, on an old. Did you hear that story on NPR? Somebody bought what was worth I think it was millions of dollars now, and they bought it when it was a few dollars, and it was on some old computer or something, which had been wiped clean.
Search for that.
Totally lost.
Yeah, exactly.
So we do have to be careful.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the medical application of it. I really enjoy the thought of an immutable ledger of me and my body and my health records and stuff that can be very easily accessed by the physicians that want to help figure out the status of my body, or the AI that needs to figure out the status of my body, etc. Okay, cool. And then how about, what is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Well, we haven't covered everything yet. Let's see. I don't know. It kind of depends on the moment. I mean,
it changes from moment to moment.
Yeah, I don't. My kids. When my kids were born, a sunset, being with someone I love.
Yeah, those are great.
Ephemeral things like flowers. Who knows? I mean, when you probably a little more substantial. I think when you feel like you've accomplished something that's useful, or somebody else has, or you have a friend or somebody you really love is happy.
Those are great.
I mean, the list goes on and on. As somebody that thinks a lot about society, and I think there are some beautiful moments when when positive things happen, and we see somebody achieving major innovation. This thing it's so hard to do. Breakthroughs in medicine. Circling back to the beginning of the conversation, I would love to see some of these ways that we organize and become more of a community really start working. I think that would be a beautiful thing.
Exactly. Yeah. More collaboration, more love, harmony. Yeah. Those were good. That was an amazing list. I think so many people agree with those moments as very beautiful moments, especially accomplishments and recognition. Just to touch into that quick, flow. You're a writer, and as a writer, focus is really important. And then you get into flow, and then don't even notice that an hour goes by and you've written a lot and you're happy with that. How do you get into flow? How do you focus?
I call it getting into the groove. Sometimes you're on the edge of the groove, sometimes you're way out of it. For those of you that remember vinyl records, it's really bad when it's scratched and it goes flying off or something like that, the record. But For me, it's a pretty elaborate set of rituals, to be honest with
Yeah, I want to hear them. Let's hear your rituals.
you. I don't know. Everybody's different.
Everyone's different, yeah.
After all the writing I've done, I still find it somewhat painful to actually start writing.
I know, me too. And I'm a rookie in it. Yeah.
Oh no, I'd like to say that goes away. The only thing that changes is you actually know you probably will begin writing again.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a younger writer, I was terrified when I would go actually several days without really writing anything that I thought was worthwhile, and I was wondering if I would ever get it back. I'm pretty sure now that whatever's happening, that I'll be back and be writing again. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I mean, I used to be an incredible slob. Like, my desk was covered with stuff. I could never find anything. And weirdly, the clean desk syndrome, like the procrastination, like everything has to be in, every pencil has to be in the right. That changed my, that changed me from being a slob into being pretty neat.
Yeah.
And which is funny because people that knew me like in college are like, what? Wow, is this the same guy? Has he been like inhabited by an alien or something? But that's partly, I don't know. It's like I have to have everything lined up perfect. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
which is such a bad process for a writer.
It can be.
Crazy.
But then you get everything lined up and you go, okay, crap, now I have to write. But the other thing
for actually publishing, for fucking it and shipping it as a writer, oh my God, perfection is so bad for writing. Yeah.
Well, I do this as a business and as a livelihood, so I actually do have to get things in.
Exactly.
And that's actually another huge motivation. As a journalist, I'm a deadline guy.
Deadlines, man.
Yeah.
Deadlines. So, for example, with me, it's deadlines for publication and stuff. And for me, it's you set an event to do something, and that's what gets the fire under your butt. You have to get prepared for it. You have to do it. There are other people there. There's people waiting for you. It's all that stuff. Yeah, it's not just something where you can go and lounge off anymore. So those goals, so goal setting and having a firm deadline on that goal.
Well, on the other hand, I write books, which take a year or many months. And those I have to treat like, I treat it like I'm training for a marathon or an athletic event. And
I'm treating it like a sprint right now, and I need to stop doing
that.
I need to treat it like a marathon.
There's madness in that.
Yeah.
I used to, my first 3 or 4 books, I looked like I had aged 10 years after each book. And it was, because I would keep writing until I dropped. And I don't do that anymore. And, when I used to teach writing classes, I used to say, I don't sit more than 2 hours and write, for instance. I get up, I walk around. That's one of the reasons I sort of wander around the city when I'm writing. Different cafes and things, and back to my office. And and if I'm not getting something, I used to hammer away, and it was such a waste of time. Because, like, even today, working on this novel I'm writing, which I start every morning working an hour on this, I wasn't getting something yesterday. And I just said, okay, that's done. I'm done today.
Yeah.
And within 30 seconds this morning, I had the problem solved.
Yeah, exactly.
And I let my brain, I call it percolation. I mean, it percolated, and I just let it. And that, for those people out there that are writing, wannabe writers who don't know this already, writing is one of the last things you actually do. I mean, the polished, finished writing. It's really got to come from your head, and it's so hard to be patient and let that process happen. Because I'm not really that patient.
And then when does the end point come, when you actually stop? Because percolation can happen after you submit it and all that kind of stuff. And
Hopefully you've had enough time. I mean, the other thing is structurally, those around me see me scratching in these little notebooks all the time. And I am pretty almost obsessive compulsive over following schedules. But I change them all the time. But I map out almost every long project. I do Excel sheets. I'm somebody who likes to check off when I do get things done. So the more things I have to check off, the more I feel like I'm making progress.
Yeah, exactly. Always setting objectives, checking them off, making progress that way.
Yeah.
Do you think love is harder than rocket science?
I love these questions, Alan. Love is harder than... Well, given that I'm not trying to make rockets, I suppose love is, yes. Yes, love is in my life, but not really making rockets. But Yeah, I think human emotions and dealing with them and human interactions. And again, in this robot book, an AI book, I'm dealing with things like I'm working on a chapter on sex bots, and it's really about machine love. And
machine love?
There are people out there that find it a lot easier to be in love with a machine, like in the movie Her.
And then in the recent Black Mirror episode as well.
Yeah, which I haven't seen, but I want to. And so, love and relationships and all of that with everybody, not just your lover, but your parents, your kids, friends, all of that.
That is so hard. Strange. You just reminded me that love with your partner, that's not the only machine love. Machine love could be with your parents. It could be.
Well, I mean that in humans. I meant that with humans, but yeah, you could also, I suppose, have that with machine love. But yeah, I mean, all these relationships, they're wonderful and they sustain us. And I couldn't live without my friends and my family, but it goes back and forth. I mean, my parents are elderly right now, and they're going through some health issues. It's really hard to see these passionate, beautiful, strong people, getting older. So I don't know. I mean, it's not easy, and it's probably, I mean, now that I'm letting it percolate for a minute, your question, I think, of course, love and relationships are probably the, once you got food on the table and all of that, that's probably one of the hardest things that we do.
Yeah.
And the most rewarding things.
Yeah, and the most rewarding, Yeah, it's so important to eradicate suffering from our world and do our absolute best to do that. I'm really glad that we were able to have all these deep conversations that went into so many different ways and alleys and stuff. So I'll go ahead and address our audience at home. I'll let you guys know that we are Simulation Series. I'm your host, Alan Sakian. This is our guest, David Ewing Duncan. And we have a Patreon where you guys can support us, and by supporting us, you get access to our guest list ahead of time. You get to know who our guest is going to be. You get to submit questions and ask questions of our guest, along with getting early access to our event info and other exclusive content. So do definitely follow us online. If you'd like to, please support us on Patreon. Give this video a like, subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Duncan DE on Twitter, so it's Duncan DE on Twitter for David, and it'll actually be in the bio as well. We want to thank BioTrillion again, our event sponsor, for having us here. They're an emerging health tech company based out of San Francisco. And another special shout out to our director, Ron Vargas, who's been crushing it on the TriCaster. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys again shortly. Thank you.